Less talk, more rock.
You want to hear truth? I'll give you truth.
They are not taking me out on my shield like this. I'm fighting back. And if you're a leftist and you tuned in by accident, hang out. Welcome back to the Professor Penn podcast. Glad to be here, your host, David Penn, on this Thursday night, January 9th, for episode number 172, which I'm going to title The People. I was going to call it Walter because we have a guest in studio this morning. I was going to call it Walter, but I thought, what are we really talking about? Well, I promised Walter safe passage through this hour and a half. We have a guest, Walter Hudson, who is a Minnesota state legislator. Walter, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's a great honor to be here.
Well, I thank you for calling it an honor, but I'm looking forward to getting to know you. My audience knows that I'm a proponent of vigorous dialogue, respectfully delivered, listening, and if people are honest, I'm good with them. And I thought it was great that you agreed to come in because you're actually in the legislature, and we do have a national audience. So I want to say to the national audience, what we're going to talk about here today in Minnesota politics, it's going on in Kentucky, it's going on in Florida, it's going on in California. Oh, it's going on in California in spades now, because the things we're talking about is how are the American citizens going to organize and restore the philosophy of republicanism as the backbone of our country. And we've got someone who's actually taken the time, marshaled the courage, and developed the constituency to actually get elected. And Walter is a rather controversial politician here in Minnesota. I've never had the opportunity to meet you or to spend time with you. And I'm going to say going into it, I hope we end up, getting to know each other today. So to start it out, since I don't know anything about you, what's the story with Walter? Where were you born, Walter? Are you a Minnesotan natively?
I was born in Michigan, and before I get into the bio, it's funny because that adjective controversial always seems to come up, and I have to ask myself, I have to wonder why. Like, what is so controversial about just saying true things that drives people nuts?
How about this? How about prominent? How about prominent? Because I'm watching you on X, and I'm watching what you're doing, and you have the courage to confront the Democrat and call him out from your perspective. They have their perspective, but you're engaged, where most of our political class, for the most part, lays back. They're not willing to go out on point. Let's say not controversial. Let's say you've gone, in my opinion, from what I'm watching, you seem to me to be taking a point position. Would you agree with that statement?
I think that's probably a fair characterization. I think it's much simpler than sometimes people try to describe it. Is I just get up and say what I believe to be true based upon the facts as I know them and understand them. And I don't think about how it's going to be received. I really don't. Because I think when you sit there and you mull over, what are people going to think about this? How's the other side going to react? You try to war game it out. All of that acts as a muffle on the core truth that it is that you're trying to express. And people can tell that, right? Like you look back at Kamala Harris, when she would do interviews, it was always a disaster. And as an observer watching it, I think the reason why is because she was constantly going through this thought process of trying to figure out, how should I respond to this? What are people going to think? What are my talking points? And she wasn't just saying what she believed. And you compared and contrast that to the way JD Vance or Donald Trump would conduct themselves in interviews. And they're just boom, 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 because there is no filter. They're not muffling themselves. They're just telling you what they think. And I think in this age, and this is going to get into, I imagine some of the stuff we're going to talk about later, in this age where we're shifting from a canned, scripted media environment that's programming, that's literally what they call it, right? We're shifting from that to alternative media, to podcasts, to long form conversations. You can't approach these types of conversations the same way that people used to approach that canned programming, because it comes across as inauthentic. It comes across as if you're lying, as if you don't mean what you're actually saying. Um, so anyway, pretty lengthy response to whether or not
Well,
I'm
okay, we're
controversial.
not gonna say, okay, Walter doesn't wanna be controversial, but I'm gonna say Walter is, how about this one? You're outspoken.
Yeah.
You're willing to step up to the mic and say things that other people might think but won't say. As a matter of fact, before we get into the bio, just to give my audience a flavor of that presentation, and really, this is why I really wanted to have you on the show. Uh, Tanner, can you just run clip number one? I think this thing is fantastic.
It's interesting. You took words right out of my mouth, Representative Kraft, when you talked about parents being willing to do anything for our children. I got 2 sons, and I've said that, I've thought that. Every parent, every person in this room who has a child has had that thought sincerely and meant it. I would do anything for my child. But you don't mean it literally, right? Like, if your child says, "Dad, I want to take an umbrella and go up on top of the roof and jump off it," or if he says, "Dad, I want to go play in the middle of a 4-lane highway," if he says, "Dad, I'd like to just root around under the sink and drink the prettiest liquid I can find," we're not going to allow those things to happen. We're not going to do those things. We're not going to go along with them. Not because we're not willing to do anything for our children, but specifically because inclusive within the anything we're willing to do for them is stop them when they are harming themselves. And we've all done it. There isn't a single parent in this room or anywhere in this state of Minnesota who has not intervened in what their child wanted because they knew it wasn't healthy for that child. And what you expect us to believe, and what 29 medical organizations expect us to believe, is that it is somehow life-saving and affirming to poison and mutilate. And I don't need to go to school for 8 years and become a doctor to know that's BS. And neither does any other Minnesotan. And that's another thing we heard earlier, in the drift toward the ambiguous, in the drift toward less detail. We heard, "Well, I'm not a doctor. I don't know what any of these things are. What are words?" That's where you have to go. You have to go to professions of ignorance in order to defend this. But I can go down the street to anybody still walking around along bars and restaurants and get a clear definition of what harm is. Maybe a demonstration in this city, right? I don't need to be a doctor to know when I see something's wrong. And going back to these I keep bringing this up, 29 medical organizations, because you keep bringing it up, because you think it's convincing. You think it's convincing to cite the fact that we have doctors and institutions that are willing to tell us things that we can see with our eyes are not true. What you're actually telling us, and what you're actually telling everybody who views this throughout the future, is that we have rational cause to not trust people with credentials. We have rational cause to not trust institutions.
Well, Walter, I have to say, you are on point, and that is a very controversial presentation. But I have to also add, as a pundit, as a political participant, that's probably, in my opinion, the best summary statement about this issue I've ever seen, because it was really from your heart. It was gritty. It was from the street. It was from the every American citizen's perspective. And American citizens are afraid to touch this issue. We're afraid because it all really, this is my opinion, goes back to the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Our country has been seeking that more perfect union my entire lifetime. And there's a lot of things that have been piggybacked upon the fight for civil rights and the hijacking of that movement for all kinds of other political purposes. And I think when you stand up and say, you know, I don't need to be told by an expert. I have my own opinion. I can see with my own eyes. This is a full-throated throwdown of what I believe. And if you go back and look at the 170 previous podcasts, that's what we're talking about all the time is, we have this intellectual class of people that have been infected
Right.
by a European intellectual tradition that really has nothing to do with the founding of this country, what the framers had in mind, or the philosophy of republicanism. In fact, that is really the kind of a linchpin in the post-World War II Democrat liberal order, scientific, technocratic, bureaucratic world, which is now being assaulted by American citizens. Its hegemony is under assault. And we're having that fight right here in Minnesota between the two parties and then within our own party. And these are the things that, why I'm so happy you came in, and thank you for, because this is what we want to talk about today. But I just want to give you kudos. When I saw that, I said, oh, this guy, this water's running deep. I want to meet this guy. But before we go back to it, we're going to book, how did we get from Detroit to that guy?
Yeah. Well, and I'll try to keep this as concise as possible because biographies are boring. But I was born in Detroit to black father, white mother. I only bring that up because it provided some context for growing up, right? And I also, both of them were Jehovah's Witnesses, which was a very unique way to grow up. I regard that organization as a cult. And so I grew up inside of cult mentality, which when I broke away from as an adult, once you've done that, once you've taken a look at, once you've rejected the worldview of your own parents, and everything that you grew up around, and you have to reconstruct it from scratch, past that point, it doesn't bother you. Like you don't have that same fear of offending somebody by telling them what's true. And I think that might explain the way we started things off here, where people will say things like, brave or controversial or whatever. And I don't see it that way because my nature is such that I have seen the consequences of going along with a lie. And I reject that fundamentally, and I refuse to participate in it. And so for me, that's just like I wake up in the morning and that's what I'm going to do is not go along with a lie. And so my dad, because I'm making my parents sound like they're terrible, they're not terrible. They just happened to get into something that wasn't good for the family, I believe. But my dad, he did work hard. He worked for Republic Airlines. He was a fuel truck driver. Then he became a stock clerk. Then he decided to go to night school to learn how to be an airplane mechanic. Then he became an airplane mechanic. Then he moved us here when I was 12 years old this was the hub for what then was Northwest Airlines. Republic became Northwest, and then it was eventually bought by Delta. And so that's how I got here. And so I grew up in Cottage Grove, graduated Park Senior High, have always been conservative in my leanings and beliefs. As soon as I was old enough and sophisticated enough as a teenager to understand what conservative meant, I knew that's what I was. And I got into talk radio very early on as a listener, listening to Rush Limbaugh while I was still in high school. That I was nerdy like that. And I wanted to do it. I wanted to do what he did. And I actually interned at a radio station here in town, KDWB, for a while, and lived in Kansas for a few months and did a DJ gig down there with a tiny little radio station in Junction City, Kansas. Then came back and started a conventional life. Got a job, met a girl, that sort of thing. Move around a few places here and there, eventually end up landing in Albertville, which is where we are now and have been for the last 12 years. And when we came back to Minnesota, we were in Iowa for 5 years while she was going to graduate school. When we came back to Minnesota, we had recently gotten married while we were down there, and we had our first son. He's 15 years old now, and that's when I really started to dig in politically with a vengeance, with a fervorance. Um, and I was involved with the Tea Party organizations, blogging, podcasting. I ended up getting a freelance gig with the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and eventually became an associate editor with them. I was finding myself being a guest and sometimes a guest host on different radio shows around town. And one thing led to another there. I eventually ended up getting offered a nightly radio program on Twin Cities News Talk over here, not too far from where we're sitting right now. And I did that for 3 years. And then 2022 came along, and we had the redistricting in 2020. They redraw the political maps of who represents what districts. That has the effect of kind of like bumping the game board and the pieces fall off. I knew there was likely to be an opening somewhere in my area. Turned out to be in the state representative district. Put my name in the hat, and the rest is history.
Well, congratulations.
Thanks.
You seem to have quite a constituency building in your backyard from outside. My audience knows I was an officer of the Republican Party. I just recently resigned. We were just talking about that just before we came on air. Walter, so you know, just to give you a little simpatico, I was raised in a very Orthodox Jewish background. It's also could be called very cult-like, very cultish, right? And I just got a nationally syndicated radio show myself that's rolling out right now. So we have some things in common. And I do understand when you say, and this is I think, very important. When you reject the foundation that your parents lay for you, when you look at them and say, I love you, but this is not for me. I mean, you're a rebel. You're just a rebel. I mean, so when you say that you're willing to speak out, the first place you speak out is to your mother and father, and there's a lot of pushback on that. So you get used to, particularly when you're in that kind of cultish, cloistered religious background, and you say, I don't think this is right. Well, they're going to push back on you. So I have some insight into what you've shared. And I think all of us, all the listeners, all the viewers, they've either acquiesced and they're reproducing what their parents laid down for them, or they've rebelled. I mean, it's a binary choice. And right now in the country, this is where I'm headed. I mean, my generation, the boomers, I'm a little older than you, I think. You're not a boomer, are you?
I don't regard myself as such, no.
No, of course not. We grew up in the lap of luxury in the probably the greatest moment of American history as far as being large and in charge.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of my generation, and this goes into the conversation about the party. The party has a lot of people my age.
Mm-hmm.
They've grown up in a period where it was relatively easy to form a family, get a job, get a 401k. The country was strong. The country, we were living on the fumes of the post-World War II period where that was a righteous war fighting Nazism and, Japanese, imperialism, and we won, and we felt good about ourselves. We felt, I was born in the 50s. We felt really good about who we were, what we were doing, and it's taken many decades for me to say, whoa, I don't feel good about this anymore. But I think many of my cohorts in my age group have not taken that step. Now, just so you know, my father, you talked about having a black and white background. My father started the Black Studies Department at the University of Minnesota.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, I mean, I have a lot of experiences that other people really don't have. But so it's easy for me to be rebelling. So when we get in, and this for the audience, this controversy that we're going to start to talk about, which is the division in the Minnesota Republican Party between what I would call, and I'm going to ask you what you would call it. I would call it between nationalists and globalists. And when I say that, I'm not saying that the people that are globally aligned in the party even understand what it is they're aligned with. I think there's a lack of ideological framework in the party so that people can really understand what it is they believe and how it came about, which is a big part of why we do this podcast. But it's really a citizens movement or a grassroots movement that is in opposition to what they see as an establishment group. And, I'm a state central delegate. I mean, I just saw it at the state central uh, meeting that we had just a few weeks ago. This has been the ongoing uh, controversy. And I see you put out a X piece like that, a posting like that, and that firmly aligns you, in my view, with the group of people that are questioning the status quo. Because when you stand up in front of the Minnesota State House and say, 28 medical organizations, I don't care. I know this is not right. Don't give me your professional opinion. Don't tell me you know more than me. I know myself. I see it with my own two eyes. This puts part of your political credibility for me firmly in the camp of the people that are questioning what's going on in the country. Do you think that's a fair uh, characterization of how you see it yourself?
My only hesitation to say yes is just because these categories that we wield, grassroots, establishment, uh, they're words that it's kind of like hope and change, right? Where the listener imposes their own definition on those words. But certainly, I mean, I'll tell you this: I'm the type of guy who knows what the World Economic Forum is and hates everything that it represents. I know for a fact that we're dealing with and it's not even a conspiracy, because a conspiracy is something that is behind closed doors. We're dealing with an openly declared intention to erase national sovereignty, to erase local sovereignty, to erase individual sovereignty, to place people under the thumbs of experts. Uh, Technocracy might be the word for that. I think there's a lot of other words that you could use to describe that. And fundamentally, at root, I believe that we own our lives. I own my life. I
You,
own me.
we call this on the Professor Penn podcast the essence of the philosophy of republicanism. I'm a sovereign of my own life. You're just saying you're a king of your own life.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's what it is, not to be Republican as in the party. It's to be a Republican as a life philosophy.
correct.
I think that's beautiful. So you're saying these labels
Yeah.
are dangerous, really. You're saying, and I agree with you, because labeling actually is a cognitive distortion. I mean, how can I capture who you are and put you in a? I'm going to miss all of the nuance of getting to know Walter Hudson. So I mean, you've just said things that to the people that listen to this podcast. Oh, you're opposed to the World Economic Forum. Sovereignty is being assaulted. My personal autonomy is under attack. I mean, everybody that's listening, and if you're a leftist and you tuned in by accident, hang out. Hang out. Because I don't think even that the left and right camps mean anything anymore.
I couldn't agree more. There was this moment during the Tea Party movement where there was this thing you might recall, Occupy Wall Street, right?
Sure.
Flared up and then flared out pretty quickly. But it was sort of they were two different manifestations of what were fundamentally the same complaint, which is that big institutions with too much power are crushing the individual. And the focus of the Tea Party was the government being out of control. The focus of Occupy Wall Street was corporations being out of control. Now, my position is they were both right. Now, I don't agree with the Marxist prescriptions that came out of Occupy Wall Street or some of the tactics that they were utilizing. But fundamentally, like and I think this is part of MAGA. This is part of the shift that we've seen in the worldview of the Republican Party in recent years, is that historically, when I was listening to Rush Limbaugh in high school, it was very common for Republicans to describe themselves as pro-business. You don't really hear that too much anymore. You don't really hear a lot of robust philosophical defenses of corporations coming out of Republicans, either at the grassroots level or those of us who are elected. And I think the reason why is because, especially after COVID and everything that happened there has been a waking up to the fact that power is power, no matter what form it takes. A government that is powerful enough to suppress my individuality is neither better nor worse than a corporation that is powerful enough to suppress my individuality. Because, by the way, the corporation only exists as such as a type of land grant from the state. There's almost a kind of a quasi-feudalism about it, where you are granted the ability to do these things that are not part of your natural existence. We're going to create this thing that we call a corporation, and there are certain things that you can do as such that you wouldn't be able to do by yourself. So we're imbuing you with a different kind of authority. And there can be utility in that, right? Like the whole concept of limited liability. I think that's something that makes a lot of sense, as opposed to having everybody sue each other all the time for everything, putting some sort of rein on the litigious nature of things. These functions can be legitimate, but when they get out of control, when they grow so big that, for instance, a vaccine manufacturer isn't liable for the consequences of predictable consequences, known consequences of a product that they're producing.
You know, I'm just going to tell you before you go down this rabbit hole all the way, we have a pretty large YouTube audience, and I'm just going to tell you, Google is very sensitive
Okay.
on these issues. Well, I mean, you're talking about the power of corporations.
Sure. Yeah, right.
And, we're on Rumble, we're on Apple, podcasts, we're on Spotify. But why we stay up on YouTube is because I'm trying to reach
Yeah.
the kids.
Yeah.
If you look at the demographics of our YouTube audience, it's 25 to 35-year-old young men. And, and if you're a 25 to 35-year-old young man and you're watching us, thank you for watching. And people are watching because there's a lack of leadership in this momentary gap where labels don't mean anything. And going back to your comment, I just want to throw this in as a personal anecdote. I'm one of those people that was a pro-business Republican.
Yeah.
Because we were before the podcast, we were down in the tire offices, and Walter said, "What do you do, sell tires in here?" I said, "No, this is administrative." But the defense that I made for maybe 20 years was, I'm a businessman. I would like to be like, don't rein in Jeff Bezos. I mean, he's me. He's my idealized self. I wish I was him. And then one day I woke up and I said, I have more in common with a cab driver
Yes.
than I do with Jeff Bezos.
Right.
And I stopped saying that, apropos to your comment.
Yeah.
And as what they call a small businessman, which when you call men small, that sucks, right? That's very pejorative. And I think they do it on purpose. There is no such thing as a small business, because to the person who owns that business, that's their entire life. It's all consuming or you don't succeed. So as a business owner, having lived through now 4 years of Bidenomics, and the previous period, we really didn't recover from the 8 years of Barack Obama's presidency. The business environment has become so centralized and so supportive of global companies, and is really discriminating against a nation of shopkeepers, a nation of independent, self-governing people. Because that's what we're talking about. When you say and to the people that are working for other businesses, this is not a rap on you.
No.
In fact, we have this thing, I just talking about this with Mrs. Professor Penn last night. She goes, I want you to close the business right now, because she sees the stress that I'm under and I'm getting older. And I'm saying, hey, they are not taking me out on my shield like this. I'm fighting back. We got a chance now. We got a new thing happening. My point is, they've made it so difficult to self-govern. You could say it's about business, but it's about your healthcare choices. It's about your political choices. It's about the media that you watch. That's the one area where we've had a breakthrough temporarily, as you were saying, that this information is getting out through this technology. But I'm also cautioning you what you say and don't say, because there
Yeah.
are people that watch what we say.
Well, and you are making my point in that caution. But
That
like that the fact that you have to give me that caution makes the point, right? So to tie it back to the party, because you had brought up that there's this divide within the party.
in every state, this would you say it's in most states we have this kind of tension going on? Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely tension within the Republican Party at all levels nationwide. What I am coming to, or what I perceive, is that it is widely misperceived where the battle lines are actually drawn. Like for instance, like this distinction between nationalist and globalist. I don't know a single one of my colleagues in the House Republican caucus who could be described as a globalist, like on any level. Who think that it's a great idea that we go along with uh, energy bans, or pick your or send money to Ukraine or any of that stuff. I think where you get into those issues is when you get to the federal level, right? Because now and I have to confess, Congress is exists in a fog of war for me, similar to how the legislature existed in a bit of a fog of war prior to entering it. Like there's a certain perspective that you gain by actually coming down off the bleachers into the arena that you can only get by doing that. And so when I look at some of the things that Congress does, I scratch my head and I go, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't understand why they're doing this.
Can I ask you a question? I mean, I don't want to interrupt you because I think you're on a great riff about this, and I want to learn about it. So I have to ask questions if we go.
Mhm.
You say that in the Republican Party, you don't see anybody with, that could be called even the label. Let's leave the
Yeah.
labels out of it. But in the Democrat Party, the people that you are in opposition to or are
Mhm.
trying to complement, the way it is supposed to be is complementary antagonism. That's what it's supposed to be. That's our system. It's an adversarial system, but we're supposed to find a way to work together. That's what the system is about, right?
We should be able to agree on certain things, like this is a constitutional republic. People have basic rights that are uh, defined but not limited by our founding documents, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Would you say that in the Democrat Party that they are aligned with a different kind of, let's say, the three pillars of what I would call the post World War II Democrat liberal order? Number one, man made climate change is
Mhm.
threatening the lives of everybody on the planet and the survival of the planet. That's one pillar. Democracy, which is a woman's right to choose her own reproductive health care, is another pillar of the deal. Let's just keep it simple and just stay with those two right now. Would you say that the Democrat Party, that your colleagues in the House are aligned with those ideas?
Well, they're on the record voting for it,
Okay,
right? So,
so we if we were going to use labels, we could say that these are ideas that are at the World Economic Forum. They're at the Democrat National Committee, the DNC. They come right down into our state house here, and everybody seems to be, to use a term you're going to know, they seem to be in lockstep
yes.
with these ideas, and they're pursuing their implementation at a legislative level.
Hmm.
Agreed?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, are we sure that we have 67 House members that are going to stand up and oppose that legislation, which is going to continue to come out?
Well, listen, I have confidence, but you're never sure what somebody's going to do until they do it, right? So we'll see how people vote.
That's very now. See that for my audience, Walter is honest. I know that now because he just said something. What you know? What, Mr. Tanner, you're not going to like this, Walter. But would you please play number two?
We watched an $18 billion surplus be spent. Not only was that spent on the backs of Minnesotans, another $10 billion of taxes and fees were added to support purely partisan priorities. And I'm happy to tell you today that those days are over. In the House of Representatives, House Republicans stand with 67 members in our caucus. As you have watched the news, we know that Democrats no longer have 67. There is no longer a tie in the state of Minnesota. Democrats will be coming in with 66 members. What that does is that gives us an organizational majority that we fully intend to exercise that right.
Okay, so here's how I look at it. Because as soon as I was after the election, and for the people that are watching nationally, we've had a all Democrat governance.
Yeah.
And it has really steamrolled the Republican Party. There was really no bipartisanship. And the Democrats ran through some very, from my perspective, very partisan legislation. And now there is a tie, which is, there's all kinds of things you want to comment on it. That's fine. But at the end of the election, there was a tie, which means power sharing. And I sat down with several legislators at different events, and they were telling me that they broke the Democrat trifecta. And my comment was, we'll see in 2 years. Because to do that is going to require legislators that I know and could call out by name, which I won't because they're your colleagues, that I'm not sure they're going to be. It's easy to vote no when you're in the minority. It's much more difficult to vote no when you're trying to keep your seat and you ran as a centrist is a nice way. Let's stray away from the labels. I don't even know how to say, I'm in CD3. And so in CD3, for those of the people who are listening, it's the western suburbs of the belly of the beast, Minneapolis. And it's turned quite blue over the last 15 years. And we have a lot of people right in my backyard who are my responsibility to get elected that, they refuse to support President Trump, for example, on record, asked publicly, do you support President Trump? I can't. I said, well, okay. Because what can you say? I mean, there's people that are going to throw bricks at them. I mean, I'm not a brick thrower when it's interpersonal. When I'm just on the podcast by myself, oh yeah, I'll pick up a boulder and throw it at somebody. But interpersonally, there's having goodwill between people. And I'm going to tell you right now, I have not yet met a Republican I don't like personally. Politically, I think there's an agenda, a belief in at least CD3, which is 800,000 people, that we can't get elected. We can't elect people if they're full-throated in their support of, let's just say, Donald Trump, to make it simple and keep the labels away from it. So how are these people going to vote? Well, this is why I say Walter's honest. Walter is saying, yeah, we could stay together and stop these people, but if even one member to save their own skin in their own district flips, then we didn't really break the trifecta. And this is where I get, and I don't know this woman very well, Lisa DeMuth, who's your leader. And she's standing up there, and to me, she looks like she's trying to be Donald Trump. That's just me. She's got great energy. She's strong. I get it. It's fantastic. But what I'm seeking as a constituent and as a party participant, less talk, more rock. Remember that from KDWB back in the day?
Sure.
Less talk, more rock. We're talking to ourselves. Now, the people that are paying attention, like we could talk at great length about all this controversy about this Democrat illegality and that. And you've been at the forefront of this. And I'm going to tell you for the listeners, the Democrat has got caught with their hand in the cookie jar here in Minnesota. And there's been election integrity issues of quite great significance. Would you agree with that statement?
Oh, of course, 100%.
Randy Sutter, and I know you know him, told me never talk about election integrity.
Did he offer a rationale?
I was leading a thing called the master classes. I was trying to get more Republicans into the party. So at my own expense and with my own time and skill, I started to hold meetings in CD3. I went to the party and I said, I want to do this. I would like your support. I want to work inside the party. And he said, that's fine. Never bring up election integrity. And I looked at him and I said, okay, if that's the deal. And I never did, because I made a deal. And if I give you my word is my bond. Now this is 3 years ago. Now everybody's talking about election integrity.
Yeah.
See, so some of us were out there on the cutting edge of this stuff.
Right.
And what's the thing now? Conspiracy theory, just wait around a few months and it becomes conspiracy fact. Like you said, they're not hiding anymore.
Right.
And when people don't hide, it's because they think they won.
Correct.
When a conspirator comes out into the open and says, it's not a conspiracy, it's your reality, you're fighting that. Now, if you'd like to comment, I think everybody in the country could take a short course from you, a participant. We don't have to get all the way down in the weeds with the law. What happened? What did you observe in these election integrity issues that happened in this last cycle? Because I think they're quite profound in their impact.
Yes, they are. But I want to answer that. But before I do, I'd like to go back to something you said earlier, because I think it's really important, especially from the perspective of a grassroots activist, to understand, to get inside the head of candidates for political office, especially within the Republican Party. So you talked about folks who are in swing districts, purple districts, who are worried about whether their association with Trump or being too conservative for their area, whatever the case may be. I have two observations about that. One, you're absolutely correct that might drive somebody to either say or do something that is not aligned with where the vast majority of the Republican constituency statewide thinks they should be. 100%. That's a possibility. What I find interesting, though, is you have examples like my colleague, Elliot Ingen, who's in one of those close districts, swing districts, who was dropping some bombs over his freshman term. We came in at the same year, and was out there on X fighting and making a name for himself, getting his hands dirty, and he just won. He just expanded his margin. We've got districts where Kamala won the district and our candidate won their race. I think it is possible. My firm belief is that you don't have to change your priorities and values and principles. You might have to tweak how you talk about it to different audiences, but ultimately what we have on offer as Republicans, it's not that radical, okay? We're saying you should be able to run your business or your school district or your life the way you see fit, that you own you. That's it. That's the nuts and bolts of it.
That's what you're saying, but what we're fighting together, and this is about getting it together. The unity part is missing because we're fighting each other. What we're really fighting is a group of people that are going to say to us, you don't have the right or the wherewithal or the knowledge to run your own life. We're going to run it for you.
Sure.
So that is, now those two poles, that contradiction, I mean, there's no labels. Those are political philosophies. That's Republicanism and the Democrat liberal order. One is expert-based, bureaucrat-based, administrative-based, big structure-based, world governance-based.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is, hey, and why I got into local Minnesota politics, I just want to take care of my own neighborhood. I'm concerned about the well-being of my children, of which I have 6.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very concerned about their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother, and I'm in SD 45, just my backyard. I want to make an impact in my neighborhood. That's what our political formation is all about. And my personal belief is that, like you say, the Congress is kind of opaque. It's kind of the fog of war. That's not even where the action's supposed to be. That's a scam. The action's supposed to be right here with your neighbor. Are you talking to your neighbor about politics? You talk to your coworkers? How about your kids? I mean, are we working our own social networks of the people that we know to spread a philosophy of self-governance and to encourage people. And they're going to say, well, what is self-governance? So when you say it's kind of a fog in Congress, I agree with you. I'm focused about what we can do here in Minnesota. And the issue is, you're talking about your colleague. He was full-throated.
Yeah.
He
right.
expanded his margin.
Yes. In a swing district.
When can we get the leadership
Yeah.
of the state, which is new, who I know well, Alex Plekish,
Mhm.
when can we get the leadership in all of the districts to understand? This is my perspective. I don't even know if this is true. This is purely anecdotal. But my belief is that the Republican Party has not contributed very much to the increase of Republicanism in Minnesota. I think it's this podcast world that's doing it. I think it's the Steve Bannons and the Alex Joneses and the Tucker Carlsons, and everybody is getting this new chance. We're not on ABC, CBS, and NBC, Fox, and CNN anymore. We have all these choices, and this audience is listening. I've got a very loyal audience of people. They like the content.
Mhm.
They come back for the information.
Mhm.
They're learning. We're all learning together. I'm researching every week, spending my time researching issues.
Mhm.
So I think it's the media, this new alternative media, that's moving the needle. And what I'm advocating for is to coordinate the party leadership and all of the functionaries through the party, to use a word, apparatchiks, because we're supposed to salute the flag and do what we're told. How can we get the party to move towards where the citizens are at? And I'm not even sure I'm right about this, because I read everybody's stuff. So there's a lot of people that are Republicans, particularly in my age cohort, that are, pretty much what I would call another label, excuse me. You'll get that one, Tanner. Reagan Republicans. And that's still a strong constituency here in Minnesota, but it's not where the action is. Those people are not out knocking on doors. Those people are not willing to do whatever it takes. They'll write a check.
Mhm.
But when I went into Camden door knocking in the Royce White campaign in the last cycle, I was there with 3 people. I put the call out. People actually said, I'm not going to Minneapolis. Why? Well, because they're afraid to go to Minneapolis. See, I object. I so deeply object. And I'll tell you, Royce got down on me about it because I was afraid too. And I thought, you know what? I'm not really afraid to go to Minneapolis. I'm going to North. I'm door knocking. And I did. And you know what? I had a great time doing it. And I would knock on these doors and these people would come out. What are you doing here? Hey, do you know there's a young black man running for Senate that came out of this community? There is? Yeah, let me talk. And they really were friendly about it. The only people that slammed the door in my face were the white liberals that lived in the district.
Mhm.
And they slammed the door on my face.
Mhm.
They didn't talk about labels. Who are you here for? I'm a Republican. Boom. So the discourse and the dialogue has broken down. Number one goal for me is to restore sane and informed dialogue amongst the citizens of the country. That's number one. But when you're talking about this issue about, the radicalization, or, your colleague was, maintained his ideals and spoke out, well, okay, how are we going to get, what does this mean to you? Because we
Mhm.
have a Royce White who got the endorsement of the delegates at the convention.
Mhm.
And I'm going to tell you, because I was on the campaign, it's my opinion, but it's not secondhand knowledge. Didn't get a lot of support from the party. There was individuals within the party that supported him, but he was really trashed by a lot of people. And I can start naming names like Paul Gazelka, Michelle Benson, Norm Coleman, Rudy Boschwitz. I mean, there's a lot of people, stalwarts in the party, that went out of their way to roadblock Royce. And the insinuation was he's an anti-Semite. That's what they smeared him with, mostly.
Which
And
was complete BS.
it was maddening to me because it was complete BS.
Yeah.
No more lying. Let's quit lying and start listening. But how are we going to take this energy, and you're in the ring on this, because I'm watching the media, and
Mhm.
you've attracted some detractors from this, citizens part of the community.
Mhm.
And how are we going to, I mean, what is your vision for creating this unit? How are we going to unify so it can really defeat the enemy, which
Mhm.
is autocracy, technocracy,
Yeah.
tyranny? How are we going to do this?
Okay. So this is going to be a challenge because I got to try to. You've laid out a lot. There's a lot of nuance to what you've laid
I'm not a good interviewer. I'm sorry.
out. Well, no, I don't think that's the case. I think you're just being thorough in terms of what's at stake, and I'm going to try to be somewhat as thorough in my answer, but still concise enough to where we don't get lost in the weeds. Okay. At root, I think what we've been dealing with, particularly in Minnesota as the Republican Party of Minnesota, for as long as I have been involved, and again, we're going back to 2010, 2008, that area, the party has been in varying degrees of disarray. No money, no resources, crawling along, trying to make it from hither to thither, from here to there, and just survive as an organization. And in that context, there has been a vacuum in there's been a lack of center of gravity because that's what the party is supposed to be. The party is supposed to be the center of political gravity for conservatism in the state. And then you have these other entities that function around it, whether it's the legislative caucuses or these outside groups, the congressional delegation, all of whom, they have their own agendas, right? The caucuses exist for the purpose of obtaining and securing and maintaining a majority. Obviously the congressionals want to get reelected. There are different outside groups, business groups, and what have you that have their own kind of like lane of interest that they're particularly focused on. And at the center of it all, there's supposed to be this Republican Party that they orbit around, but the party is the center of gravity. We haven't had that in this state, and we haven't had it for years. And the consequence of that has been that if you think of it, if you continue to use this analogy of planetary bodies of a center of gravity, when you take that away, then you get these rogue planets, these rogue planetoids. And that's what all these surrounding organizations have become, is they're just off doing their own thing, fulfilling their own interests that are occasionally are aligned with what the people in the party would want, but often are not. So how do you fix that? What I wanted to see happen, and what I still want to see happen and hope happens, is that the party presents a value proposition that is basically what you're outlining, which is we need to have a media infrastructure. We need to have a 21st century community engagement plan where we're out there talking to people. We're showing up on their YouTube short feeds. We're showing up on their X feeds with our messaging, and we're talking. We're highlighting the thing that Representative Elliot Engen said on the House floor the other day, or this controversy that's taking place in this special election over here in Curtis Johnson's seat, or we're getting our message out. But in order to do that, we have to have resources. And when you have resources, you can pay professional people to do this work professionally full time. And I think that's where the hang up is there's folks at the grassroots level who are understandably suspicious of professional politics. We have this term that we utilize of like career politician. It's fascinating to me as a conservative. It's fascinating to me that it seems like the only sector of life where we don't value expertise and experience is politics. When you want your sink unplugged, your drain unclogged, you want to call a professional. When you want your roof done, you're going to call a professional who's been doing this for 20 years and does it every day and gets paid to do it. But when you want to send somebody to work on your behalf politically, well, they better be an amateur and they better be doing it on their side gig, and they better be doing it out of the kindness of their heart. And then we get what we pay for in that regard. And so the challenge is to on the grassroots side, if we want to use these labels, to overcome the skepticism of professionalism that exists there, and I understand it. I'm sympathetic to why people feel that way. We need to figure out a way to overcome that on the one side, and on the other side, we need to provide the types of people who write big dollar checks a value proposition of this is what we want to do with your resources, and this is the return on investment that you can expect in terms of restoring that center of gravity that will hold all this together and create a coalition that can win those statewide victories and secure those legislative majorities and have it all targeted towards the central mission, which is, again, you own your life and all derivatives of that, right? Um, and I'm really kind of, at least in my mind, I feel like I'm oversimplifying this just for the sake of time. But the issue is confidence and relationship. Folks on the grassroots side don't have confidence for their reasons. Folks on the donor side don't have confidence for their reasons. And we need to overcome those hesitations on both sides and keep people buying into a central vision for what Minnesota should look like.
Using a Samuel Jackson reference, let me retort.
Sure.
Personally retort on this. I'll make a bunch of I statements. I'm not going to speak for anybody else. We have a lot of professional politicians, and what they've given me is endless war.
Fair.
Open border and $36 trillion of debt. They're the professionals. You know, I used to say for years, you can't let the inmates run the asylum. However, when the doctors are mass murderers, we're going to be better off with the inmates. We have the evidence. I have the evidence in my own lifetime of waking up. You know, I almost went to the Vietnam War. I mean, I'm that age group. So, you know, I've been watching this my entire life. I played on the podcast, this last podcast. I think we gave $50 billion of arms contracts out this past Monday. We're arming both sides all over the world. I did a deep dive into the Sudan, where there's a terrible famine and a terrible civil war. And our country, you and me, us, it's us, because we're by the people, for the people, right? Our government is us. We're arming both sides, and it's killing millions of people. Millions of people. And if you look at all these conflicts around the world, you just look at where the arms sales are going. We're in this kerfuffle with the Turks, with President Erdogan. We're saying, he's not good. But we're arming him. We just gave him $23 billion of military equipment, but we're building a military base in Kobani in Syria to defend the Kurds, which Erdogan has committed to destroying. This stuff is so not like you and me. If there's a fight in a bar, we're going to pick a side. You have to pick a side. We're not picking a side. We're on all sides. That's our professional political class. That's why the grassroots, maybe they're seeking the information of why they feel the way they do, and they're getting the information from a Steve Bannon or an Alex Jones. You know, the information is getting widely disseminated now. So the political class, and look at you just tore down the doctors, which were supposed to go for a well-being check every year. We have the evidence I have the evidence as a citizen that the outcome of the professionals is not good. Okay, so that's A. B, we have media now. We don't need to proceed the way we did previously. And so when you talk about a professional donor class, I know who those people are. They give to the Democrat Party also. I mean, I live in Minnetonka. I know these people by name. Some of them I'm friends with. Now, those people with the money, I'm not going to mention, because unlike the politicians, those people hit back. But they're giving to both sides. They're giving to both sides. They're on both sides of the football, because what they want is an outcome, in my opinion, which satisfies their business needs. As you said, they want a return on their investment.
Mm-hmm.
What I want is a politics that is for the well-being of every American citizen. That puts me somewhat in conflict with someone that says, it's about me. Republicanism is not about me.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with any of that. Literally none of it. What I will say, or what I will add in terms of perspective, is that a donor has influence. We need to acknowledge that, right? The fewer donors you have, and the more desperate your organization is to be able to do things like make payroll, the more influence that donor is going to have over how you conduct yourself as an organization. And that's where the Republican Party of Minnesota has been for years, is very few people being able to dictate with their dollars what the party does, because it's that or don't exist. It's an existential threat. What I'm suggesting is, if you have a value proposition to expand the donor base, the more donors you have, the less influential any one of them can be. So you can't have one guy come forward and be like, I'm in order for you to exist as an organization, you have to, oh, I don't know, get rid of pro-life from your platform or something like that. Or hypothetically dissolve a party unit, right? Like, we can come up with examples of things that have been influenced by donor dollars. So it's kind of this catch-22 where I understand the skepticism of professional politics. I would go back to the analogy of like the big international corporation versus the Main Street store. They're both businesses, but they're not categorically the same for a wide variety of reasons. Similarly, yes, in DC has the professional political class and the lobbyists and that whole, the swamp. Have they worked counter to the American people's best interests? Are they playing both sides of international wars? Are they maintaining this, as you guys call it, the post-World War II liberal order? Yeah. Does that give us reason to doubt professionalism as such? Perhaps, but I think that's a categorical mistake, because what you're doing is you're denying yourself that Main Street utility of here at the local level, actually utilizing it for the purpose that it was intended for. This seems to me to be an example. I mean, this incredible studio that we're sitting in right now, what wasn't a product of, didn't manifest out of the ether, right? Like, there were resources that were invested into it to make it happen.
Yeah, the Syrophoenician woman showed up and gave all they had. That's exactly what happened. So I do want to say, this is something that I want to comment on personally between you and me. I say to my audience, we've got a store, Free People Store. People can go buy T-shirts there. I have a tire business. My audience knows that we're in the tire business for our viewers, tireget.com. We have ways, but I'm not grifting.
Yeah.
I'm doing this for the political. But to maintain something like this, I don't want to go broke doing it, and I could, because it's very expensive. So when we have a void in the center, which what you've said yourself, there's a lack of a coherent party in the center, or an effective party, and it spawned these other outside organizations. I guess I would be one of them, although I've tried to be in the party. And let me just tell you, so you know, because you're an elected official, I went in the party with no prejudgments. I don't judge people. I don't want to be judged, so I don't judge people. I went in, tried to serve the party. People didn't like me, and I'll tell you why they didn't like me. I'm very honest about how I feel about things. I'm not talking about telling people I don't like you. I'm just saying, hey, you know what? I'm Ukrainian. Don't be BSing me about the Ukraine. The first language in my house was Russian, so stop. Okay, don't feed me this BS. Let me give you the history going back to 1805, because I know it. And then a guy who was on the CD3 board heard me do it, and he said, well, history doesn't matter. And I looked at him.
Oh, boy.
I looked at him and I
Okay.
said, really? You must be Army intelligence. And he goes, as a matter of fact, I am. I said, I'm not surprised, because only somebody that comes out of the intelligence corps would tell constituents that history doesn't matter. And I've called this guy Mr. History Doesn't Matter, because it does matter. And what I would like to see happen in our party is a real effort at educating the officers of the party about why it is they believe what they believe. because I think we don't know often why we believe what we believe. It takes somebody like you who has rejected their birth programming, and that forced you to think it through for yourself. But we got a lot of people that have no idea what's going on, yet they continue to, reproduce the same politics. And we've got all these grassroots people now that are watching the Steve Bannons. I talk to people all the time. Do you watch War Room? No. Do you watch Alex Jones? No. Do you watch Tucker Carlson? No. He's a Russian sympathizer. We've got the cleave in the party, really, if you want to get down to the you can get everybody in the party to say we should close the border. Everybody. Everybody's going to say,
That used to be controversial.
not now.
Yeah.
Not now. I mean, even the ones that benefit from an open border would not say it out loud because they're going to get tarred and feathered and they know it. Because the border issue has been won by President Trump.
Yep.
The debt, this can go on to $100 trillion of deficit. I mean, people don't realize the power the Fed has to play this game, but it's making us poor because the inflation is getting everybody. Those two issues, everybody in the party agrees. You agree. I just watched Lisa DeMuth talking about, fiscal responsibility in the Minnesota House.
Right.
But when we get over to this war issue and the idea of America being the strongest, greatest nation on planet Earth and our military, that's where you hit the 50-50 split in the party. In my opinion, we got a group of people in every state, throughout the party, throughout the RNC, that are supportive of the current formation of our political economy, which is a war economy.
I wonder if that's true. I mean, so I think, I don't know if it's 50-50 in terms of numbers. It might be 50-50 in terms of
Influence.
Yeah.
I don't know what the numbers are because, the party, if you just go back to the Royce White deal. I'm not going to play, just out of respect for you, I got a 5-minute clip from Alex Plekish being interviewed on the radio. And he talks about, the battleground in Minnesota is Minneapolis and St. Paul. That's if we're going to win statewide.
Yeah, I think
right?
I heard that interview. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Alex, you didn't support Royce White. I know because I was there. You worked for Joe Frazier. You didn't give any support. In my district, in 45, Kathy Folk refused to show up on a stage with Royce White. Royce White was pilloried by the people with influence. But he got 1.3 million or 1.4 million votes. He did great. And he was the guy that could have gone into that city. Go ahead.
So here's my opinion on all of that. I was deeply frustrated by Royce. Not because I disagreed with him about virtually anything. I mean, I spoke on stages alongside him on multiple occasions. In fact, there was a picnic that a couple of CD or BPOUs put together down here where I took my boys to it, and my eldest son was just mesmerized by Royce. I mean, he sat there through a 30-minute speech, just like paying more attention to that than he's ever paid attention to anything that I've said. Right. I think what frustrated me about his campaign was that he was peeling back the onion and talking about things that don't get talked about and offering perspective that doesn't see the light of day, and doing so from as a black man from Minneapolis, right, who has that perspective and that access, like the potential on what he could and still can achieve is off the charts. The way it was delivered, the combativeness, the vulgarity, that was such a turnoff for people that it made it like, I will tell you, there were times when I would see a post from Royce on X and I would go, this is an awesome point, but I can't retweet it because there's an F this and a C that and and it made it very difficult to support something that needed to be supported. And so what I would caution people is, don't assume that because somebody wasn't supporting Royce, that the reason is because they disagree with all the things that he was saying and they're on the other side of those issues and they want us all to be international globalists under some sort of worldwide Marxist rule. That's not necessarily the reason. They may agree with every baseline concept that he's putting out there, but just don't want to be associated with how it's being communicated. Now, is there probably a spectrum there where are there people within the Republican Party who would fit your definition of globalist? Absolutely. No question. Are there people who like the idea of us being in perpetual war and exerting our strength as a nation, and feeding this military industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about? Absolutely. And they should be combated. And we need to have that conversation. But I think part of what actually ends up handicapping the grassroots of the Republican Party is the assumption that because somebody has an objection to presentation, that must mean that they're opposed to the content, the substance of what somebody is presenting.
I think that's a reasonable retort, but I will say again, Congress is full of 45 to 85-year-old elected representatives. They've got a wife. She's beautiful. 3 kids, beautiful. Never a divorce. Never a bankruptcy. They don't swear. They're church members. They're thoroughly evangelical Christian. And they've voted me into a place where our country is spending about $2 trillion a year on what?
Mm-hmm.
Killing people. Now, if you believe in the 2 great commandments that Christ brought forth, the second one being love your neighbor as you wish to be loved, and our country has dedicated itself in a political economy to assert military control, even to the point of, dropping bombs and killing people all over and arming people all over and genocides and all these problems that are going on. And they emanate from, and it emanates right here at this table. You're an elected representative. I'm just going to give you my side of it. My side of it. I want every single American citizen to rise up and throw off this political economy because it's the economy of death. You gave a full-throated indictment of a medical technology, which you said it's just wrong. Don't tell me it's right. You did it without swearing, but you were very confrontational. And so, the swear word, let's just go a step further. I know it says in the good book, don't swear, but what they really say in there is don't use the Lord's name in vain. Don't say, I swear to God, I didn't do that. That's the real essence of that. And I recognize that swearing is thought of by some people as being vulgar and obscene and profane. But there's a whole class of people in Minneapolis, the low-hanging fruit voters that you and I can go get, I'll go door knock with you, that speak like that every day. They don't talk like Joe Frazier. They don't look like Joe Frazier. They don't look like Alex Plekish. They don't look like Alex. In fact, Alex would be under some threat walking around. In fact, Alex can join us and go door knock in Camden with us. Because if we're going to take back the state for Republicanism, not for the Republican Party, but for self-governance, we have to do a ministry in the city.
Absolutely.
And talk to the people in the city. You come from Detroit. I'll suspect that there's a persona inside of Walter Hudson that you're not sharing with us. See, I've learned this because I've been hanging around the black community my entire life. As I said, my father started the Black Studies Department at the University of Minnesota, and he was fired for doing it. So, I mean, I've got deep roots back into the 60s with this stuff. I grew up in the community. So I've recognized, and I'm going to say something that's controversial, and people can maybe get pissed at me. Black men and men of mixed families have multiple ways of presenting themselves depending on the audience that they're speaking to. I'll bet if we go downtown to Minneapolis and we're up north, you can hang. I just got that suspicion. You're from Detroit. Maybe you don't. If I do, you can say screw off. But Royce has that. Royce, when he is in a public setting with human beings, he does not swear.
I've seen that. I've noticed that. Yeah.
He's very charismatic and very likable and very approachable.
Yeah. Gentle.
Very gentle. When he's on X, it's entertainment.
Right.
This is entertainment. I mean, there's a political aspect to this, but if it's not entertaining and gripping, nobody watches it. So he's speaking exactly to the constituency that the Republican Party needs if we're ever going to have. Could we win by accident for a short period of time? Yes. If we're going to get a sustainable change in Minnesota, it's going to be in 3, 4, and 5 with the very people that Royce is speaking to. And what I'm suggesting is he can speak to all the groups of people. And I think my personal feeling is, from not anecdotal, from people talking to me, it wasn't just the swearing. It was his stance on the Ukraine. It was a stance on, for sure. I mean, people told me. I am in CD3. I know for a fact there is a strong cohort of people that believe that the United States should fund that war and, if necessary, fight that war. And that
is very surprising to me.
Well, then you need to spend some more time in CD3.
Okay.
Because I don't want to name names, but there's one guy who, because I was not willing to do this, I took a group of Jewish Republican Party officers up to Royce at the convention because they all came up to me and said, Royce is an anti-Semite. I said, he's not an anti-Semite. I know him very well. He's Catholic. He loves the Jewish people. The Savior is Jewish. He gets it.
Right.
And we went up and talked to Royce. And when I walked away, they said, I don't believe him. Well, if you're not going to believe the words that are coming out of people's mouths, then we got to go down one level. Let's all just quit lying to each other. Because that's another thing about these professional politicians, because Royce and you're now politicians.
Yeah. I
have one ask for all my Republican Party compatriots. Let's just quit lying. Yeah. Let's quit lying to each other. Let's not say, I support the party, like we want party unity. I've been to so many meetings, like Kendall Qualls. They brought him in to talk to me. Unity. We're going to have unity. We got to have unity. And then he went out and supported Joe Frazier after Royce got the endorsement. Now, we're only going to get unity, like, for example, Kathy Folk ran in my district. She said she wasn't going to support Royce or President Trump. I didn't work against her because I was a party officer, and it was my responsibility to support her. If we're not going to have any discipline in the party, and we're going to look at the grassroots people and say they're grifting and they're not cooperating, and then the shoe goes on the other foot, which it did for the first time with Royce's endorsement. Hey, the bar door's got to swing both ways. If we're going to have unity, we have to listen to what the delegates are saying. And if the delegates are going to endorse a Joe Frazier, I'm going to support Joe Frazier. I'm a Republican Party participant. But if they're going to endorse Royce White, I'm going to support Royce White. We need to get, as a predicate, we need to quit lying to ourselves about unity. Unity swings both ways. If the party is moving towards a more populist dimension, and we got a group of people at the top of the party that wield disproportionate influence, and they're going to just sit, then we're going to continue with this divide. And people like you, Walter, who understand this because you've let me know already how deep you understand these things. You're not a topwater. You get this stuff. You can be a uniter. I want to be a uniter. What I want to talk to you about in future meetings and future podcasts is how do we bring these groups together? And my first building block, the cornerstone, is let's just tell the truth to each other.
Yeah, well, let me try doing that. Okay.
Go.
So when I talked earlier about the party being a center of gravity in like a solar system of conservative groups, right? caucuses, congressionals, different entities that are all kind of playing in this conservative space. When we talk about unity, first of all, it is very important that we define what we're unified around. What is that center
The
of gravity?
ideological framework.
Yes, right. Because unity for the sake of unity is not going to happen.
It's not going to work.
Right. There has to be something at its substance. And the Republican Party of Minnesota's reason for existing is clearly stated in our state party constitution. We exist in order to organize at all levels to elect Republicans. So the term grifter that I have deployed, I don't see like anybody who has a podcast or a revenue stream as a grifter. What I see as a grifter is somebody who has an illegitimate or fraudulent value proposition. That they are not aligned. They present themselves as an ally of that center of gravity, but they're on a different mission, right? Their mission is not to elect Republicans. And what gives that category of person and organization has been given an environment to thrive in by the scarcity that I described earlier. Because that center of gravity has shrunk so small and wields so little influence over the broader system of conservative organizations, what it has done is it has diminished the value of the endorsement. And because the value of the endorsement has been diminished, it gives these other entities the ability to challenge, to go rogue, to push back against the endorsed candidates, right? So in order to fix that, that center of gravity needs to become denser and more massive. And this is what I'm saying is the catch-22 that I don't know if it's a catch-22, but it's counterintuitive. We need to be willing to do things that people have an aversion to, such as raise money, hire staff, build out an organization, build out a network of organizations that are working in tandem in different silos, whether it's training people to do grassroots activity, working with BPOUs, training, spoke earlier, training officers in these local units of, what is your job? Why do you even, what are your best practices? What's working here? What's working there? We need to have a professional operation that does that, because what that does is that will expand the mass and density of that center of gravity and give the endorsement teeth. Now, that is what I was trying to advocate for going into State Central. You want to hear truth? I'll give you truth.
Please.
Working for the party was a stunting experience in terms of I got very jaded very quickly. Very jaded very quickly. Because it seemed as though the more we tried to do to build out that center of gravity and therefore give the endorsement more value, which would therefore deter people from countering it, the less trust we had from multiple different angles. The less trust we had from the grassroots because, you're raising money, donors, that's dirty. I don't want to deal with that. And then from these outside groups that have something to lose from the party getting stronger, there was pushback from there as well. And so you had this weird alignment going into State Central where the grassroots wanted something different for the sake of having something different, at least as I understood it. And the establishment, if you want to call them that, didn't want to see the party become strong because a strong party threatens their ability to go rogue. And so these two forces that are supposedly aligned against each other actually formed kind of like this eclipse where suddenly they both agree that the party shouldn't be a thing, right? Like in terms of existing as a functional, robust organization. Now, The outcome of that was what it was. Alex is now the chair. I wish Alex nothing but the best. I have offered to help him in any way that I can. You know, if anything he calls me up and asks me to help him with, if it's within my ability, I want to do it. I want to see that vision of the center of gravity becoming more massive and more dense and providing some control over these other rogue elements. I want to see that happen, but it's only going to happen if there's a vision for how it should function that is attractive to donors and provides service to people. Because at the end of the day, that's what politics is. It's relationship and it's service. You serve people, you earn loyalty legitimately, you win elections.
I think that this is, as we wrap up, it's a great place to start a long-term conversation, because how I view it, because I would certainly be viewed, like when they give you the pushback after this airs up, there's going to be people say, why'd you talk to him? And you're going to say, God, he was pretty reasonable. He didn't seem to be a flamethrower. And I'm not. I don't like the line number one. But this fight, how I view it, is over this issue about what is America? What are we doing here? I really do see two huge ideological frameworks at battle for the first time in our country. You know, the Democrat liberal order buried republicanism in 46. When Truman released the Truman Doctrine and said we would defend democracy all over the world, and we took over the British Empire, everything that our founders and framers had put in place in 1776 was overturned. And we've been living in this completely different culture, and we grew up in it. You were born into it. I was born into it. It's like being born into the Matrix. And we're waking up from this thing. And there's a lot of citizens that are saying, we want our party to change. I want the Republican Party to be in juxtaposition to these Democrat legislators that you agreed are following and plying the same trade as the World Economic Forum.
Yeah.
We have to be really in contrast to them and give the voters a chance to have a stark and clear distinction and choice. And the battle in the party, from my perspective, and I'm in the trench. So, I mean, I'm not really just a pundit. I'm in there door knocking. I was on a BPOU, just resigned. I'm going to run again in the spring. I mean, I resigned because there was so much corruption on my board. I just said, I'm not going to deal with it. I don't want to deal with it. So, I think it's really about the nature of what America is. And I think if our legislators, our elected officials really become sensitive, that it can go either direction. I mean, even President Trump, I'm not quite sure what direction he's going. We have an ideological confusion about what it is to be an American. And there is a group of people in this state, in this room, that'd be me. I'm very clear about what I want America to be, and it has very little to do with what it's doing right now. And that puts me in conflict with the donor class and some of the more influential members like Rudy Boschwitz. He's on the Council for Foreign Relations. He's a fellow of the most internationalist organization, World Economic Forum aligned organization that exists. It's much more important than the World Economic Forum, Council on Foreign Relations. You know, that's who we got. Norm Coleman, RJC. I mean, we have generated people. And people are going to say, geez, we thought you were Jewish. You're speaking against the RJC. No, I'm not speaking against Jewish people. I'm speaking against a forever war. That's what I'm speaking against. And when we clarify that in the party, that we are a peace party, because if we really want, in my opinion, this is my politics, if we really want to create a new constituency that is overwhelming and sustainable in the long term, we're going to peace. We're going to be peaceful. We're going to change the nature. And people say, well, that's just impossible. 5% of Minnesota's employees work for defense contractors. The University of Minnesota, government payroll. Mayo Clinic, government payroll. I mean, the incursion of big government into Minnesota is so far, you're a legislator. Everything is dependent on government. If we're going to go back to self-governance, that's a cultural shift. And what my anger or my encouragement is, oh, yeah, I'm a state legislator. that's not really in my wheelhouse. I hear that from Andrew Myers. I don't know anything about that. That's not my thing. It better be, because if we're going to change the culture so that the people that are in the poverty of North Minneapolis are going to be liberated from that, it's going to take all American citizens to dedicate themselves to that. And I don't think that's a bad thing for us to do, to work for our fellow citizens, to love our neighbors as we want to be loved, to stop funding every friggin' war all over the world. And I'm the crazy guy that gets up and reads the Federal Register every morning. And where do I go first? Defense Department. We are the arms dealer for the world. I don't want to live in that country. I want to live in a God-fearing country. So I'm taking the end because it's my podcast. But I'm going to say thank you so much for coming here. It was great to get to know you. I hope you found the conversation to be gentle, and I listened, and I really enjoyed getting to know you. But I do want to give you a summary statement because you're my guest. If there's anything else in the few minutes we have left, if you'd like to say something, please.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I did think it was a very substantive, thorough conversation that still just scratches the surface. Like, I would love to sit down and just talk about foreign policy and wars.
Well, you're welcome back anytime you want to come.
I appreciate that. But I guess what I would leave people with is there's divide and conquer is a well-known strategy, right? And there's tremendous utility in assuming and perpetuating the idea that there are enemies within and there are people who are trying to do malicious things. And sometimes you're right? Like what you just described in terms of and what Eisenhower described, the military industrial complex, the forever wars, the America being the world's arms dealer, that's a real problem, and we do have to address it. What I would caution people against is painting with really broad brushes. Like, be specific and be relational. Deal with people as people. And take them on good faith until you have a really, really good reason to know that they're acting in bad faith. That's the only way this is going to work, ultimately. We can't forget, when we talk about unity, again, as we said and agreed, we have to know what it is that we're unified around. We have to define that. What's the goal? What's the mission? What's our task? Unify around that. And then the way to the way, and then build it out. The way we're going to build it out is through relationship. It's not going to be through command and control. It's not going to be through threatening each other and calling each other names. It's going to be by getting to know one another, realizing that you have common cause, and then strategizing to fulfill that cause. So that's what I hope we're starting to work on here.
We are working on it. That's, and for the people that are listening to me, and I got some people very interested that you're coming on, and I told people, I want to damp down the labeling. I want to damp down assuming what people and where they're coming from. And I'm going to take it a step further. People can disagree with me. I don't even think it's bad will. We just disagree. What I want to do fundamentally is quit lying to each other.
Yeah.
And the fight in the party is necessary. It really is, from my perspective, because my life is dedicated to opposing what I was born into. And, that takes a lot of work. Of course, I've been doing that since I've been a very little kid. I'm used to it. I think you've been doing it too. And if you really are a believer in peace, well, we have to work for that, because right now our country's at war. So, I want to thank you for coming on. I do invite you back. I hope we have a personal relationship now. I don't have your phone number. I want to get it afterwards. I'm following you on X. Everybody should follow. What is your handle on X, Walter?
At Walter Hudson.
At Walter Hudson. It's worth following. It's great information. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank all of the audience for putting up with this, if it was too Minnesotan. But remember, this is going on everywhere. Tanner, do we have some music to go out with today? I put on the script. I bet we do. What do we got? Oh, this is for Tucker. We have we played Message in a Bottle by the Police, and Tucker, one of our most valued audience participants said, hey, Machine Head's got a good version of that. So, Tucker, this is for you. Everyone have a good night. We'll see you soon again. Thank you very much.
Just a castaway, and I'm lost at sea. Another lonely day, there's no one here but me. More loneliness than any man could bear. Rescue me before I fall into despair. I've sinned and SOS to the world. I've sinned and SOS to the world. I hope that someone gets mine. I hope that someone gets mine. I hope that someone gets mine. Message in my poison, yeah. Message in my